Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday afternoon. I was working yesterday, so you get me on Wednesday before you see me today. I hope you're having a good week, staying warm. Just continuing to stay informed about what's going on with our country, with our pandemic. I shared with you Sunday one of my grandsons, Joshua, has COVID. Now Ariel, my oldest grandson, Joshua's sister, has it. And so, and I'm sure you and I could have a conversation about many family and friends we know who are dealing with COVID right now. So just continue to pray for God to give us wisdom and insight. I will share with you, I got my second shot yesterday, actually on Monday, and did not have any ill effects from it. I was very blessed. And so we just keep pressing on in our lives to grow God's kingdom. Not going to get into a lot of discussion about everything else that's going on. I believe it's just, for me, it is a distraction on concentrating on the things God has for me and my family and for us as a church right now. So that's my focus. My focus is on His Word, spending time with Him, and staying focused on the kingdom of God. We're in John chapter 18. We left off last week. Jesus has been arrested, and he's been taken to Annas, and he is who is the son-in-law of the high priest Caiaphas. And so now he is, in verse 24, he's been bound to over and taken. Says verse 24 says, "Sent and bound to Caiaphas the high priest." I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about Peter's denial. And if you read verses 25 through 27, you'll see that there's two denials here. And so we just want to let you think about some parameters here for just a minute. I shared with you last week that I felt sometimes like John felt like he was pulled in two different directions because he's trying to not take care of Jesus, but be there for what's taking place with Jesus. But Peter's in the courtyard, and we talk about Peter and John kind of being, not the best of friends in the sense that they weren't buddies, but maybe sometimes they were vying for Jesus' attention. And so, but John's trying to take care of Peter and look after him, so he's back and forth. And we're going to see as we read these 25, 26, and 27 that we see Peter denied Jesus 2 times. And we go over to the Gospel of Mark and we see he denied him 3 times. And people say, well, see, that's a contradiction. Well, let me just play this out for you just a little bit to kind of put this in perspective. John is between checking on Jesus and checking on Peter. So he's going back and forth. So John may have heard Peter denied Jesus twice. In the Gospel of Mark, John Mark is the author of that gospel, but his information came from Peter. So guess who probably knew how many times he actually denied Jesus more than anybody else did? I would think Peter would be the person we would look at. So is it possible that John heard just 2 being back and forth and missed one? Absolutely. And he shared what he knew of the situation because he was there when Jesus looked at Peter and said, "You're going to deny me." So he knew that transpired. And so John's list in his gospel and his writing is writing what he saw. So in verse 25 it says, "Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself." Remember, John got him into the inner courtyard, which was a courtyard in the middle of the house that went around the courtyard. Kim is in the Springs building over in the former Savannah Commons. And they have an inner courtyard that's totally surrounded by their rooms. So all the rooms go all the way around this courtyard. And so that's kind of what it was back in this day. You walked through the front door, you were in a foyer area or an atrium, and you would walk from there into an inner courtyard. If you went left or right, you'd go from room to room. I want to say this is a nice house. This is not the average Joe Blow's house that Annas lives in. He had a nice house. And so Peter's inside. It's cold. He's over by the fire. He's trying to keep his mouth shut and be kind of seen but not heard. Verse 25 says, now Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself there at the fire. And so they said to him, you're not one of his disciples as well, are you? I mean, they didn't know him. He's a foreigner inside this situation. So maybe since Jesus is on trial with Annas at this point, they may have just figured, well, we don't know this guy. Maybe he's with Jesus. Okay, just an innocent question. And Peter said, no, I'm not with him. Now, this is a situation, I don't know if John was trying to listen to Jesus and what was taking place there, and all of a sudden he snatched his head around because it surprised him what Peter would say. And so one of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, so Clopas, one of his slaves, recognized Peter as the one who wielded the sword. And of course, it was dark in the garden. They had the torches, and I mean, you and I have been outside before with lanterns and things like that, and you don't always see as well as you do in a room that's lit like I'm sitting in right now. And so one of these slaves looks over at Peter, and the first question got asked, and this slave is standing in the vicinity, and this slave hears the question and looks over at Peter, who they're talking to, and he goes, wait a minute. That looks like the guy who cut my master's ear off. It looks just like him. I mean, they just saw him not more than probably 30 minutes before that. And so this slave says, did I not see you in the garden with him? Aren't you? You look like the one that cut my master's ear off. I mean, I don't know how much that he said, but I'm sure he began to put two and two together. And Peter again denied that he knew Jesus. And it says, as soon as those words came out of his mouth, there was a rooster that crowed. And Peter, I don't know if it was a rooster that was a part of Anna's chickens that he had there that they got their eggs from, or it had to be close by. And all of a sudden, in the midst of this darkness, we hear this rooster cry. And it doesn't go on to a lot about Peter at this time, but you can imagine that Peter's heart just sunk in his chest when he realized what he's done and what he'd done. Peter was very boastful. Peter was very prideful. Peter was adamant to Jesus that he would die for him. He would never, ever do anything to harm his master. And when we get to the end of the Gospel of John, we're going to see Jesus restore Peter to his prominent place as a part of one of the disciples. And we'll get to that. Verse 28 said they brought Jesus. He went to Caiaphas' house. Caiaphas interviewed him, interrogated him. And he says after they went to Caiaphas, that they brought him to the praetorium. It was early in the morning. And they themselves did not enter the praetorium so that they would not be defiled. But the Passover feast this would have been early Friday morning, starting at sundown that day would have been the beginning of Passover, and the religious leaders did not want to defile themselves by going into a Gentile's home, so they wouldn't go inside. This is Pilate's large estate in Jerusalem. Okay, this is a big place. And so they brought him to Pilate, who was the governor of that area. Okay, he governed Jerusalem, and so here they are. They've interviewed him. We see in some of the other Gospels that he admitted that he was the Son of God, and of course they said blasphemy, and they said that's all we need. He needs to die. But the problem is because had Israel been Israel and been governing themselves, they could have stoned him to death. That would have been an easy thing. But because of the situation with the Romans governing the area, they did not have the right to kill anybody without the Romans' permission. So they brought him to Pilate. Verse 29. Pilate came out, the praetorium. Was Pilate up? Did they wake him up? Was Pilate just a late night person that was up? I don't have any idea, and we're not really sure. Sometime between maybe 11 and 1 or 2 in the morning, and I'm just, guys, I've not done a lot of research here. I'm just kind of looking at the time frame of what's taking place. And so Pilate came out. He came out of his place, and they're standing outside. And Pilate looks at these religious leaders, and he says, "What accusation are you bringing against this man?" I'm sure they sent someone in, one of the soldiers, and says, "We need to see Pilate. We have an issue here." So Pilate comes out and says, "What's he done?" In verse 30, they answered and said to him, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." In other words, we don't want to say what he's done because we really don't have any proof, but duh, Pilate, would we waste our time this early in the morning to bring you somebody that wasn't a criminal? I mean, they almost dishonored and disrespected Pilate as if to say, you know, you dummy. And in that kind of vein is the way they kind of left it. So verse 31 says, "So Pilate said to them, 'Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law.'" And he said, "This is not my problem, it's your problem. You're the ones that are having issues with him." And the Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." In the law, they were permitted to stone, but like I said, because of the Romans being there and being rulers over them at the time, they could not kill on their own initiative. So they intimated here to Pilate, "Hey, we want him dead." Verse 32, "This happened so that the word of Jesus, which he said, indicating what kind of death he was going to die, will be fulfilled." When we talk about suicide for just a minute, you say, "Dale, that's kind of a right-hand turn," but let me preface this, and I think you'll understand why I'm wanting to say what I'm wanting to say to you. There are a lot of types of death that happened during this time, and so when we talk about Jesus' death and his resurrection, there are some theories that say he didn't die on the cross. He just kind of passed out, and he almost quit breathing, and they just couldn't tell. And when they stuck him in that cool tomb, he resuscitated and got up, and he walked out and said, "Hey, I'm alive," but he really never died. It's called the swoon theory, that he just passed out and he swooned. And so I want you to think about forms of suicide for just a minute, okay? And I'm not going to be gory and go to the details, but you know what they are. And so the Jews, in their when they killed someone, most of the time it's with stoning. So I mean, you can that's something somebody else had to do. But in this situation, this form of death that was picked by the Father for Jesus to die is one of those type of deaths where you can't do it to yourself. You can't crucify yourself. You can't tie your hands on the cross and tie your feet on the cross or put nails through your hands and feet. It's an impossibility to do it by yourself. I mean, you tack this hand up, you can't tack this hand up. So I'm saying that to say to you, people can say, well, Jesus killed himself, you know, and now he's a martyr because he killed himself. And it's not possible in the sense that the crucifixion was something that had to be done by somebody else. It wasn't something he did to himself. He did not take his life and then say he got it back. Crucifixion is something that is done by someone else. And in this situation, the kind of death he was going to die was not Jesus taking his own life, but his life being taken from him by the people of that day. Verse 33. So therefore Pilate entered the praetorium again, and he summoned Jesus and said to him, "You are the king of the Jews?" He just asked him. He said, "Are you? You know, do you consider yourself the king of the Jews?" And you got to understand, Pilate has seen so many of these people before. He's seen Barabbas. He's seen so many other sect leaders that came in, the zealots, who tried to overthrow Rome in the name of Yahweh. And so all of this major climactic stuff that's taken place. And so he walks up to him and says, "Hey, you the king? Yes or no? Just answer my question. We'll get this over with and move on, and everything will be fine. I'm ready to go to bed." Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" In other words, are you asking for your own information, or are you asking because these guys out here have made some comment? Or maybe you heard it from someone else in that works for you here in the Praetorium. Maybe one of the maidservants or a manservants have said to you that I've heard Jesus, or I believe in Jesus, he's the King of the Jews. And he just asked him a question. He said, why are you asking? And that's so like Jesus in the sense that the focus here is about who he is. And so he looks at Pilate and says, hey, are you asking for your benefit, or are you just asking because that's the vogue right now? Okay? If you want to know for your benefit, I believe if Pilate had said to him, hey, listen, Jesus, I'm interested. I want to know what you're about. Then I think Jesus might have given more information. But Jesus knew in his heart, Pilate was trying to get information out of him so he could dispense of him and move on to something else. Verse 35, Pilate said, do I look like a Jew to you? That's what he asked him. He said, He said, I'm not Jewish. I'm not looking to follow you in that sense because he was a Jew. The understanding was everybody who followed him must be Jews. So this is a Jewish thing. It has to do with the religious leaders. It's all about the Jews. That Pilate just assumed that's what it was about in that situation. He says, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and chief priests handed you over to me. Now, Jesus said this in John chapter 17, and he said it more than one time if you want to go back and look at this verse. He said, my people are not of the world, and I am not of this world. And Pilate here says, your own people have handed you over to me. And your chief priests. And here's the thing. They weren't Jesus' chief priests nor his people. They were not. They didn't follow him at all. They didn't follow him and believe he was the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who came to save them. And Pilate looks at him and says, what have you done? In other words, what have you done to tick them off? What could you have possibly done? This is not a situation where it's a Barabbas where this sect of Jesus and his followers are attacking the Romans. Barabbas, although was a criminal, in some aspects among the Jews was seen as a hero. And so we've got this situation here where Pilate's confused because now it's not the Romans trying to break up a sect who's trying to overthrow Rome. This is a guy who's trying to overthrow the Jews. And Pilate's going, this is not my business. Doesn't belong to me. Why are you even in here with me? He was frustrated. Jesus answered, verse 36. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. We could spend hours talking about that little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. We have made the church out to be something about here and now. We've made the church as an entity and an institution that is here. And there are things you have to do to get into church. You have to follow these rules and do this and come before the church and ask to be admitted. And we have turned our churches into institutions in this world. And Jesus plainly says it right here. He says, my kingdom's not of this world. He said it's not. He said, I'll prove it to you. He said, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that not we hand it over to the Jews. He said, if my kingdom was here, if I had planned to overthrow Caesar, he said, the men and women who follow me, they'd be outside with their spears and swords, and they'd be hacking people up to get me free. He said, but that's not my kingdom. He said, that's not why I came. He said, I came to make a kingdom here. That was not the point behind why Jesus came to this earth. He came to set us free, and he came to give us a place to go be with him forever. But that is not why he came. He came for relationship. He came to be a part of our lives. He came to be the one who redeems us, who saves us, not from something in the sense that we're in jail here and he's going to open the cage and free us. That's not where this comes from. He says, but as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. It's not a worldly kingdom like Rome. And Jesus is not planning to go attack the entire Eastern world at that time and take it over for Jesus. I mean, he's going to go capture all these people, and then he's going to tie them up, and he's going to say, "You go worship me." That's not what his kingdom was about. His kingdom, he said, it's not of this realm. He said, it's not only not of this world, but it's not of the realm where we are right now. He said, my kingdom has nothing to do with the Jews. It has nothing to do with Rome when it comes to being politically correct. Verse 37. So Pilate says, well, if you have a kingdom, I guess you are a king, huh? And Jesus said, you say correctly. He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He said, you say correctly that I am a king. He said, for this purpose I was born, and for this I have come into the world to testify to the truth. Jesus came to save us. And we call him the King of Kings and Lord of Lords because of his position through his death, burial, and resurrection. And yes, he was a king, but he didn't come to put together an earthly kingdom. He said, for this purpose I have been born, and for this I have come into this world to testify to the truth. The Jews were given the truth, and they refused to accept it. They didn't want anything to do with God the Father other than just tell me what I got to do to keep my nose and ears clean, and then I'll be fine. But that's not why God sent Jesus. He didn't send him to give us a bunch of rules and regulations to follow. And I know, folks, as long as I've been here, you probably heard me say that more times than you want to imagine or even think about. And you're probably tired of hearing me say it. But until we understand relationship, until we get to the place where our understanding of that relationship that Jesus has for us and us with him, we're going to struggle with everything that's trying to transpire in this world. Because unless we understand Jesus in relationship mode, we will not understand what our purpose here is on this earth. He says, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Those who understand his concept, and we could go back to John 17, we'll see where the disciples looked at Jesus and said, now we understand the things you're saying. Now we understand that you came from God and that you know all things and all things have been given to you. And so they're beginning to understand the concept behind that. And they understood that those who want truth are listening to him and to his voice. And so Pilate hears this statement from John. And he says, Pilate listens to this, Jesus, talking about this statement about testifying of the truth. And Pilate looks at him and says, what is truth? You know, there's a movie, there's a line in the movie where this politician says, this is what he says. He says, truth is what I say it is. In the way we are today in this world, that's a pretty good definition. And I'm sure in Pilate's situation as governor of this area, the concept was truth is what Pilate says truth is. If Pilate says this is true, it's kind of like that. When somebody says something, you say how high on the way up. You already started jumping. Somebody says jump, you're jumping and ask them how high is you're going up. We're gonna be obedient. We're gonna do whatever we're told to do, and for that person, that is truth. Pilate had no concept because Pilate's concept of a kingdom was a physical kingdom, and Jesus has already told him, "My kingdom's not here. The king and Pilate would have had no way of understanding what he was saying. After this, saying this, he came out again to the Jews, and he said to them, I don't find any fault at all for charges in this case. He said, I don't see any reason to bring this man up on charges. He has admitted nothing to me, and I have seen nothing that you brought me that says, I mean, you didn't even give me any information. You just said, duh, if he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him. You expect me to accept that he's a criminal in your word. You imagine how long that would have lasted if the governor of that area, if the upper echelon found out that he was just arbitrarily killing people for no reason at all. Verse 39. However, he says, you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at Passover. Therefore, do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews? And they shouted again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a rebel, an insurrectionist. He was one who had planned, he was a Jew, and he had planned an overthrow of Rome. But he and his cohorts were doing that. So, they're saying, we don't want Jesus. If you're going to release somebody to us for the feast like you've done in the years past, give us Barabbas. We'd rather have Barabbas than Jesus. It's another area we could spend many, many minutes and hours on. The concept of the world today, that we would rather have something that we can base our beliefs on, that we can see other than the truth about who Jesus was. If you're going to give us somebody, give us a man who tried to overthrow you, maybe so he could do it again and we'll still get our way. But this man Jesus is not after Rome. He's after our jobs. And that just can't be. Let's move into chapter 19. So Pilate took Jesus and he had him flogged. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. That's John 19, verse 1. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Verse 2. And the soldiers. You see, we just zip right on through that time. And a stick that was used to flog would have been a stick with leather strips tied to the end of it. And there's different stories about what these things look like. Some said these particular things that were used to flog humans had metal ball bearings tied into the end of the rope. Some people say there were shards of metal or shards of glass that were tied in to the edge of these, to the end of these leather straps. And what would have been done is Jesus would have been bound and would have had to lean over. He may have been tied against a post. And so he's upright with his back way over. And they would have taken that flogging strap and they would have swung it at him and hit him on the back with these straps. And if the strap was this long and the little barbs were on this, and I know you can't see them, let me pull my hands in a little bit here. If the strap were this long or longer, and this end's hooked to the wood, and this end has the barbs on it, then what would have happened is that the straps would have hit Jesus somewhere in here, so they would have slapped him on his back, and momentum would have carried those barbs around his back, and they would have hung in his side over here. And the person who's flogging him is standing on one side or the other, not standing necessarily directly behind him, because they don't want to hit him this way. They want to hit him where it wraps around his body. And when those ball bearings or the shards of metal or glass would come around, they would inflict themselves into the skin. They would cut the skin open and they would embed themselves into the skin, and then they would grab a hold of that piece of wood and they would yank it and it would just rip the flesh open. Now, according to Jewish law, a flogging could take place and you could be beat with 40 lashes. Now, I'm going to just tell you something. One lash, I'd be done. I would have just, when that first one hit and ripped my skin open, I'd be finished. And Jesus To be honest with you, we don't know how many times he was flogged, but he was beaten several times, okay? Probably more than 10, maybe as many as 40. And every time those straps would come around, they would leave indentations on his back and on his side, and those metal shards would dig in and just continue to rip his flesh to pieces. By the time he finished this beating, his flesh would have looked like mush. They would have beat him so much. And I'm not trying to be gory to you today, and those of us that have seen the Passion of Christ understand this, but he was beaten, and Isaiah said he was not even one to look at. And the way he was beaten so bad, I'm surprised that even his mother recognized him when he made it to the cross. And it says, these soldiers who beat him took some thorns on a long vine. These thorns were growing, and some people say they were probably an inch or two long. I don't know how big they were. But they took these thorns and they wove it into a crown. And they placed it on his head and they pressed it down. And you got to remember, he's tied up. He cannot move his hands. And this is one of the most vascular places in the body around the head. If you've ever had a head injury before, if you've seen anybody who's cut their scalp, it just bleeds incessantly. And so as that crown was placed and pushed into Jesus' head, it would have tore the scalp and he'd have began to bleed. And the blood would have ran down his eyebrows and into his eyes and around his ears. And he would have been no way for him to wipe it off. And the blood would have coagulated as it came out, and it would have stuck to his face. And I don't know if he would have had trouble seeing. And it said they found a purple cloak. I don't know if this was an old piece of purple cloth they had somewhere. Maybe it was purple was a sign of royalty. Maybe it was something that Pilate had he'd thrown away. I don't know. And they put it around his neck and tied it on like a big cape. And then they began to bow before him, and like he was when we're saying, hey, like they would say, "Hail Caesar," they were going, "Hail Jesus, oh hail Jesus, King of the Jews," and they're laughing and they're just having a grand old time, making these noises and doing all this stuff. And it said they would slap him, you ever watch NCIS and watch Gibbs, and he'd slap Tony in the back of the head, and I'm sure Jesus is having trouble seeing because of the blood running down his face, and they're popping him on the head, and I can see him saying, "Tell us who hit you. You're God. You know which one of us hit you. Tell us what my name is. You don't know my name, but which one? Who was that just hit you? What was his name?" And they're mocking him this whole time, and they're slapping him. And I want you to see this. This is not this kind of slap. I mean, they're rearing back and they're just popping him across the face. And his head's jerking to one side and back to the other side. He's been up now for close to 18 to 20 hours. Jesus was an early riser. Maybe he got up at dawn at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's after midnight or around midnight. He's been up for 18 hours. He's been sharing with his men. He's been teaching them. He's been in the garden just agonizing over what the decision he has to make. I'm telling you, he's tired. He is so tired. And these men are just beating him. And I shared with you last Wednesday. Can you imagine Jesus just finally said, "I've had enough." Okay. And then he just looks up at some of these men and he says, "You sorry, so and so and so." The words come out of his mouth, and he said, "Stand back, because the lightning of God's coming to zap you where you stand." Let me tell you something. He wouldn't have had to hit but one. And as soon as he hit that one and that little puff disappeared, the rest of them would run. I mean, Jesus had that power. He had the power to call the angels to his side. The enemy told him so. Satan said to him, "Hey, the Bible said, Old Testament says your angels have charge over thee unless you dash your foot against a stone." He could have called them. But yet he kept his mouth shut. And it's interesting here in verse 3, it says, "And they slapped him in the face." They slapped him in the face. That to me, that means multiple times. But in the New American Standard, it says they slapped him in the face again and again and again and again and again. And I can see those soldiers getting blood on their hands from slapping him on the face, and walking over to that purple cloak and just wiping their hands off on the cloak. And the blood is from it's. And you gotta think about this too, guys. They've taken this cloak and they've wrapped it around him, and his back is like spaghetti, and this cloak touches his back, and the blood begins to coagulate. And if you ever had clothing stick to a wound or something, or maybe you had a 4x4 that you put over the wound, a piece of gauze to protect the wound, and then several days later you had to pull it off and it was stuck and it wouldn't come off, and how much it hurts to rip the scab off that's holding that piece of gauze on, and just the pain that's there. And can you imagine them grabbing this cloak and just yanking it off of him and just ripping those wounds back open so they start bleeding again? Verse 4. Jesus has been flogged. We're probably talking about 15 to 20 minutes. The religious leaders are standing outside. Pilate walks back out and he says to them, by the way, just think about this. Jesus is probably in the courtyard of the Praetorium where they're flogging him in there. And these religious leaders outside would have heard the screams of Jesus as he flogged. There's nothing that says that Jesus didn't cry out when he was beaten from the pain. They would have heard it. Okay, and I don't know how they reacted, whether they laughed or tried to be solemn. I know, but I really believe that they heard all this going on. And so Pilate comes back out to him, and he said to them, hey, I'm bringing him out to you so that you will know that I find no fault, I find no grounds at all for charges in this case. He's innocent. I don't have anything to charge him with. I don't think Pilate said he was innocent. I think Pilate said, I don't have anything to charge him with. What do you want me to charge him with? I can't find anything. And Jesus walks back out with this robe on and this crown of thorns on his head, beaten. I mean, we'd have laws today that said you can't beat dogs like that. And he's totally mutilated. And he brings it back out. It said that verse 5 said Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate looks at the religious leaders and he said to them, behold the man. Look, this is the man you brought to me. Look at him. I beat the crap out of him. My soldiers have humiliated him and placed this silly crown of thorns on his head because he said he was a king. I mean, we have humiliated this man you brought. He's not going to bother anybody anymore. Nobody's going to follow him. Just look at him. He's allowed himself to be destroyed. He didn't fight back. Just go back to your Passover feast and leave him alone, because he's not going to be a problem to you for a while, because it's going to take several days for him to heal. Verse 6. So when the chief priest and the officers saw him beaten, hard to recognize for the blood and the mutilation he's taken, they start shouting, crucify, 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 crucify. And I'm sure the religious leaders weren't the only ones standing there. And as they began, you ever been around somebody that started something, a chant at a football game? You know, go, 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 go. And it just gets louder and louder, and everybody joins in, and it's just, everybody just gets caught up in the frenzy. And I'm sure there were people that were standing here during the Passover. Then all of a sudden the frenzy just started. Crucify, crucify. And it gets louder and louder, and it's in the middle, early hours in the morning. And Pilate's thinking, man, these people are stupid. They're going to get me in trouble. This town should be quiet now. They're making all this racket, and all this is going on. They begin to yell this over and over. And Pilate said to them, well, take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no grounds for charges in this case. He says, he said, take him, do what you want to with him. I don't care. He's innocent. You want to kill him? Go kill him. You want to do something? Go do something with it. But I'm not doing it. You see, the Old Testament said that unless it was a close family member, brother, father, mother, sister, child, something like that, you could be defiled by that. But you could not be defiled by touching someone or being around somebody dead if you had no relationship with them. Excuse me. And so here are these religious leaders thinking, we're not going to crucify him. We're not going to dirty and soil ourselves right here before the Passover, which starts that morning. That evening when the sun goes down. Verse 7, the Jews answered him, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. And so there was a law that said if anybody else says they're God, then they could be stoned. So they said, that Jesus said he was not just a king, now he's saying he's the Son of God. Well, this scared Pharaoh a little bit because anybody who proposed to be a king would be against Caesar. So if there was a sect out there where the person running around leading it said he was a prophet and he was the king of the world and he was the Son of God, and Caesars were seen as gods as well, it would have got somebody's attention, and it would have gotten back to whoever Caesar was at that time. And I'm sure probably they'd want to have that person deleted from this world so they didn't have to worry about it. So when Pilate got scared, he heard this statement from the Pharisees, which he hadn't heard beforehand. He was more afraid, and he entered the praetorium again, and he said to Jesus, where are you from? And what he was trying to get him to do is tell him what city he was from, and he could pass it off on somebody else if it was some other city than one he was responsible for. And Jesus just ignored him. He just looked down at the floor. I don't know what he did. Looked up into the Father. He prayed, but he was on a tripod in the sense that he was sitting there with everything there in front of him, and he says, "I'm going to punt him off on somebody else." So when he asked the question, Jesus didn't answer him. Just didn't say anything. Just sat there. Verse 10. So Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me anymore? Are we not carrying on a conversation? Are you just quiet?" He says, "Do you not know that I have the authority to release you, and I have the authority to crucify you?" He looked at Jesus and says, "Don't you understand that your life is in my hands?" Can you imagine a 2-year-old walking up to her mom or dad and look at them and saying, "But you don't understand, this is my room and I'll do what I want to in here. You do realize that this room belongs to me, don't you?" And those parents going, "It's going to be a trip to the woodshed here in just a minute." That little girl doesn't understand the concept, and neither does Pilate. Pilate thinks that he controls life or death in this situation, and that's not true. And so here we are. But Jesus answered him and said, Jesus answered him, gave him no answer. Verse 10, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you, and I have the authority to crucify you?" In John chapter 19, verse 11, Jesus answered him. And I can see Jesus raising his head and looking at Pilate as much as he could. And he said, "You would have no authority over me at all if it had not been given you from above." Romans chapter 13. Paul talks about all authority is divinely inspired. And what Jesus does is he understands that the future is not in Pilate's hands. The future is in his Father's hands. That's where he lives. He says, you have no authority over me at all. That's pretty blunt, isn't it? If it had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has greater sin. You see, they don't know what's going on. They don't understand who Jesus is. Pilate and them don't, and the one who handed him over, Judas, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. Verse 12. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews shouted, saying, if you release this man, you're not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. They used something to their own initiative, something that they could work with, something that means something to them. And they look at this and say, well, we don't believe in kings, particularly from foreign lands, but in this case we'll make an exception. Let's see if we can get through just a couple more verses and we'll finish up. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and he sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement. In Hebrew, it was called Gabbatha. It was a place where Pilate would go and sit and he would judge the cases that came to him at that point. And so he sits down. Jesus is standing here somewhere over to one of his sides, still in the same predicament he was in. He's lost more blood. He's surely weaker. John says, now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. And at this time, it was about the 6th hour, which is noon. Now Jesus has been up 18 and 12, 30 hours with no sleep. He is now hypovolemic, which means he's lost copious amounts of blood. He's probably having trouble standing up. His blood pressure's dropping. His respirations are picking up. And Pilate looks over at Jesus and he looks at the Jews there. And he said, Jews, hey, look at your king. So they shouted, away with him, crucify him. Get him out of my sight, out of sight, out of mind. If I kill him, we stop what's taking place. That's their mantra, that's their mindset. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? He's still taunting them. And they look at him and say, the chief priests answered him. The chief priests, the ones in control. We have no king except Caesar. They just put their alliance with the God of this world instead, the God of heaven and earth. Father, I thank you for your word. Thank you for speaking to us about the things that are transpiring. Pray that you'd watch over us and keep us safe as we do the things we do each day. Lord, give us a good night's rest. Let there be excitement and fun here tomorrow and Sunday. We love you and bless you in Jesus' name. Amen. I love you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your prayers and concerns. And look forward to seeing you Sunday.